Now I'm live from my office. If you're watching on YouTube, you could see his handsome face. I'm joined by Alex Partridge, one of the world's great advocates for mental health. And if anybody, and obviously if you're watching this, you have followed me through the years, you know what a passion this is for me and my constant harangue. You don't snap out of it. It doesn't just go away. And until we all treat mental health the same way we treat diseases like cancer and various other things, we're not going to be a full society. So, Alex Partridge, I thank you for being here. I want to talk about your new book and a million other things.
Oh, Steve, thank you so much. It's such a joy to be with you here today. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm excited to jump in.
There's a thing called RSD, which most people probably will not have heard of, which has sort of become, I guess, your life focus. I don't want to overstate it, but with ADHD being the root of that, maybe we start there. Define them both, if you would.
So, yeah, I mean, it's a great question. So ADHD is, as the DSM-5 and the World Health Organization and loads of other American Association of Psychiatry would define it, as a neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by traits of impulsivity and forgetfulness and disorganization. And that's kind of ADHD, and that's a whole ball game, and we can talk about that and many challenges and many strengths that come with having a brain that experiences life that way. And it's a whole conversation around dopamine deficiency and noradrenaline deficiencies and all of that. But that's part of the conversation. When you have a brain that works like that and operates in that way, and it does create behavior that many people might define as a little bit different to the typical way of presenting. It can make you very distracted, very fidgety, unable to concentrate for many hours at a time, have trouble sitting down in a classroom, be called a daydreamer. You have so much potential. All of these things that if you have that type of brain, society will remind you of that difference many times by saying these comments to you. Now, when you're a child with an ADHD brain, and this is the heartbreaking distinction, it's been discovered that those children, they're exposed to 20,000 extra micro rejections in their formative years, 20,000 little reminders of their differences. And those reminders can look like comments such as, why are you being so dramatic? Why are you so sensitive? Stop being lazy. You're too much. You're not enough. Why are you doing it like that? Be normal. Stop fidgeting. Why are you crying? Sit down. It's not that loud in here. All of those kinds of things. Even nonverbal rejections like an eye roll. And that bombardment of extra criticisms create an adult that suffers from RSD, and it stands for rejection sensitivity dysphoria. And it means that you experience intense emotional pain when you perceive someone has criticized you or rejected you as an adult. And it often means, Steve, that you can't do anything unless it's perfect. You might stay in the office 4 hours later than everyone else, or you might stay up all night simply to complete a piece of work to such a high standard because the thought of your boss making a tiny correction to it is too painful. You avoid disappointing people, which turns you into a people pleaser. You'll often suffer in silence because you don't want to be a burden to anyone, whilst inside you are imploding with sadness and shame. You'll put your own wants and needs behind everyone else's. And quite often you will avoid making decisions because over the years, your nervous system has learned that it feels safer to avoid uncomfortable conversations. So you might not apply for that promotion at work, or you might continue to let that friend walk all over you, or you might stay in that abusive relationship. All of these decisions make you extremely vulnerable as a person, and really they're actions that you're putting out in the world in order to protect yourself from the intense pain of rejection sensitivity dysphoria, RSD. And it's imperative that people who live with it become aware that they're living with it. Because if you don't understand that you're living your life putting everyone else's needs ahead of your own, It can be a bit debilitating. It can be totally exhausting. And in some cases, it can be dangerous.
The mental exhaustion you're describing is overwhelming, and this striving for perfection, is that an effort in an RSD individual to please someone else or just to avoid another hurt, or maybe it's a little bit of both?
So it's a form of avoidance. You might be lying on your sofa. I know a lady who was, desperate to start this business. She had a brilliant business idea. She was going to set up a dog walking company in near London, where I live, and she was really passionate about it, really keen to do it, but she was so scared of the feedback that she might get from her family or her friends or her partner, that she was too terrified to even start. She never bought the domain. She never actually actioned any of the idea. She just sat on the idea, thinking about it all the time. But because she was so scared of any feedback from her partner or family, that fear was greater than the excitement towards starting the business. So she procrastinated it, and essentially perfectionism won, and she never started the business. The RSD mind will convince you that it's safer to not try, because if you don't try, if you don't make that first step, if you don't start that business, if you don't jump into that opportunity, then it's safer, because then you're not exposing yourself to the risk of any rejection or the risk of any criticism or feedback from the outside world that isn't totally positive. And that's devastating, because then you get lost potential.
You get a lost potential, and also you give up on your dreams. You give up on living life. You don't maximize your life. That's what I'm hearing from you.
Oh, exactly. I mean, it's RSD, ADHD in general. It's a story of lost potential. It's a story of broken dreams. It's a story of, I could do that if I was able to get over this obstacle of perfection. It is heartbreaking. It's a brick wall in front of people that stops them moving forward with their dreams and their ambitions and ultimately their happiness. And that, as an individual, experiencing life that way is heartbreaking.
Now, your journey to this mission is interesting. You were one of the social media pioneers with Unilad and Lad Bible, and then found yourself going down this road because I think it was at the age of 34. Correct me if I'm wrong. You found that you not only were dealing specifically with ADHD, but it would develop into this broader understanding of RSD. I think that's an important point to make for people. One of the roots of understanding addiction, for instance, is people can hear from people who are also addicted, who have walked the walk. So you come from a place, and I know with the folks you sit down and talk with, your clients, your patients, that's a big deal. So I want people to hear this and see this and understand this is not just some professorial speech here. Somebody that read a lot of books. You've experienced this pain, and the pain part of it, I think, is key, because this RSD manifests itself in true physical pain, correct?
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. And like you said, I'm not someone who got diagnosed with ADHD and read a load of books and interviewed a load of people and discovered RSD and wanted to talk about that. Like, when I discovered RSD and I realized that its impact on my life when I was living with it without knowing that I had it nearly killed me. Like, to this day, I 100% believe that RSD nearly killed me, and I'm incredibly lucky to be here. I'm very aware that I am one of the lucky ones. There are so many versions of my story where I am but a cautionary tale, dead before 30. And the story is this. Like you said, I was at university when I was 20 years old, and this was when Facebook had just sprung into everyone's conscious.
Right.
And that was the year that I started Unilad. I remember running down to my housemate's room and saying, "Philip, what do you think of the name Unilad?" And he blew out this puff of suspicious smelling smoke and said, "Yeah, that's really cool, man." So that was back in 2010. And so with a focus group of Philip, the name was chosen. And I became obsessed with Facebook, totally obsessed with growing this brand called Unilad. But I had a problem because nobody understood or knew what it was. So I had to think of a way to market Unilad and to get it into the mind of students. So I started something called the Safe Sex Campaign, and it was super simple. Anyone who liked the Facebook page would get sent a free condom in the
I'm,
post.
I'm laughing or smiling here because I've seen your TEDx talk where you describe this, and I would encourage people to look for your TEDx talk as well. But not only did your safe sex gambit work, a lot of people got a free condom.
Yes, yes, very true. I mean, I actually ran out. The marketing campaign went surpassed expectations, and I had like 30, 40,000 people liking the page and writing me their address to send them this condom, and I only had about 2,000. So I think if there was like a spike in birth rates in the UK around London in 2010, that might be the reason. But yeah, so the campaign was very successful, and Unilad really blew up off the back of it. It went from like nothing to about 50, 60,000 followers. I left university to pursue it impulsively in true ADHD fashion, left university, and I decided to go all in on Unilad. And this was in about 2000 and late 2010. But I needed help. I didn't have the word for it at the time, but looking back now, I would say overwhelmed. I had this huge community, brand deals to manage, emails to reply to. Essentially, it was a small business at that stage, and I was just running it on my own in a bedroom. And I needed help. I knew I needed help. And I put out an advert asking for help. And these two men replied to the advert, and I met them in a restaurant. And we were all going to go into business together. And they presented me with a partnership agreement. And I remember that day like it was yesterday. My intuition was screaming at me. It was telling me, do not trust these two men. Stand up and run away now. But there was something deep inside me that day that didn't know how to say no. And I picked up the pen and I signed the piece of paper. And very shortly afterwards, I logged on to the Unilad Facebook page, and I had been completely removed from it, completely kicked out of the business I had started when I was at university.
And not to interrupt, but what you're describing sounds like before understanding your own RSD, the inability to say no was that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was only in hindsight, since starting my podcast 3 years ago and learning about RSD, that I was able to look back at that very specific point, that lunch in that restaurant with those two men, and recognize the power that enabled me to pick up that pen and sign was people pleasing.
Yeah.
It was, even when my intuition, my judge of character, my internal BS radar was screaming at me saying these guys are clearly not trustworthy, I ignored it. I didn't have the courage to listen to it. And the people pleaser won, and I picked up the pen and I signed the piece of paper, got kicked out of the company. I went to see a solicitor. When I got kicked out of the business, I filled with thoughts such as, how could I be so stupid? How could I be so foolish? The solicitor, the lawyer, looked at what I had signed and said that they're not allowed to have done this, but if you want to fight this is going to be won or lost in a courtroom, and you're going to have to give evidence on the witness box. And to be honest, at that point, the emotional side of my brain panicked, because the idea of me giving evidence on the witness box in front of a busy courtroom was terrifying. And my heart rate sped up just thinking about it. And I stood up from my solicitor's office, my lawyer's office, and ran out, and I went to buy a bottle of vodka. And I can only tell you what the nurse told me when I woke up in hospital the next morning. And that's that two members of the public had found me in an alleyway late at night. I was still clutching the bottle. They tried to help. I wasn't interested. I staggered away, hit my head on a wall, fell over, and they called an ambulance. And as the nurse was telling me this, I remember this huge feeling of shame and anxiety. And in that naive state, I thought I knew the only thing that would cure this anxiety was more alcohol. And I knew there was a shop near the hospital. And I jumped up from the hospital bed, ran out of the ward, tried to get out of the hospital. Security had been called. And before I knew it, I was being restrained on the floor with my face pressed against the cold surface. And I turned my head and I looked out, and I could see my mum and my dad looking at me. And I'll never forget that look on their face. It was a combination of fear and desperation. They didn't know what was wrong with me. I didn't know what was wrong with me. You know, that experience took me to Alcoholics Anonymous, where I first heard those four letters, ADHD. But I was so hyper focused on the court case, I didn't really think too much of it. Fast forward 2 months, the court case trial happened in London. I was on the witness box for 6 days, cross-examined by a very, very expensive lawyer on their team. But I got through it. And then fast forward another 2 months, after the trial, my telephone rang, and it was my lawyer. And he said, "Alex, are you on your own?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "You've won everything. You've won the company back." And you know, I remember that phone call as well, like it was yesterday. I fell to the floor and burst into tears because, yes, it was a 3-year legal battle, but for me, it was a huge mental health battle that nearly cost me my life.
And in that moment of elation, I'd be curious to know if you have found that RSD folks like yourself, are you able to enjoy the wins? Are you able to live with the wins and experience the wins, learn from the wins, or do you more absorb the losses and the pain?
So back when I won the court case, there was no real long-term realization of the success. In the moment, it was euphoria. When my telephone went and it was my lawyer and he said, "You've won everything." I couldn't believe it. I had to ask him to repeat it. And he said, "You've won everything. Like this judgment is unappealable. You know, this is a landslide victory." And for like an hour, it was, you know, jumping around and calling people, and I couldn't believe it. But I have always been the type where I don't absorb good news, or at least not for more than 30 minutes or 40 minutes. I move on to the next thing and I move on to the next thing. And that feeling.
Well, it's one of the more crippling facets of RSD, right? Because you're able to absorb the pain or the negative thoughts, but you're not able to stay with the positive thoughts. And, you know, I tried to tell, my wife and I both tried to tell our kids growing up, just as a general knowledge from parents thing, you know, as a public person myself, I certainly have gotten a lot of criticism, some of it well-deserved. But I tried to explain that people who are rude, people who are mean, they don't think about you all day. They think about you in the moment that they're rude, and then they're on with their business. And if you allow it to affect your entire day, then you're allowing them a win, you know, just as it's something to hold on to. But when somebody has RSD, that doesn't work, right?
It's very hard. It's very hard. You know, the positive stuff, the compliments, you did really great there, Alex. They bounce off you. They go in a little bit in the moment and you're able to absorb them for like half an hour, but they bounce off you really. There's no long-term stickiness to them. So it's very difficult to rebuild your self-esteem when you anticipate negativity around every corner. If there's any ambiguity in a comment, you catastrophize and you assume the worst. You're very suspicious and very skeptical of praise because you've been bombarded with so much of it throughout your life. Your nervous system anticipates it and expects it all the time. So when someone does give you praise after you've done something well, you don't truly absorb it or let it go in. Whereas the opposite with negativity and criticisms and, you know, genuine insults, if someone does actually give you a real rejection or a real criticism, that can be truly devastating for someone with RSD because it's almost confirmed that inner monologue that you have inside your head telling you that you're defective or useless or lazy or there's something wrong with you. And when someone actually does receive a criticism who has RSD, then it can be truly devastating, because in that moment you're hyper focusing on your suspicions being confirmed.
The book you just wrote, I have it here. Why Does Everybody Hate Me? How many is this now? How many books?
That's my second book.
Okay. Out and available everywhere. It's vital as far as I'm concerned. It's absolutely vital for anybody who thinks they may be dealing with this. It sounds like we should think of ADHD the same way we think of arthritis, of cancer in the medical terms, that it's an umbrella term. And RSD is underneath that umbrella. But it's a big facet of ADHD. If you have ADHD, it doesn't mean you have RSD, but you may, correct?
I haven't met someone with ADHD without it.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
That's not to say that everyone has it who has ADHD, but it's very, very, very common. I think.
Is there different gradations of it, of RSD?
Again, there seems to be. I mean, it's how people deal with the pain that can be more severe. And some people's coping mechanisms, coping strategies, things that they use to soothe that pain can be more severe in others. For me, it was alcohol. There's a story that I tell, and it's that as part of my sobriety, I go to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. And I share this story with absolute permission, and I've changed her name. I was in a meeting and a lady stuck up her hand and said, "My name is Bethany and I'm an alcoholic, and I had been sober for 7 years. But last weekend I relapsed." And she said last weekend she was sat in the office at work, ready to clock off on a Friday afternoon for the weekend. And her email pinged. And the email was from her boss. And the email said, "Bethany, have a lovely weekend. Can we have a chat on Monday morning?" And that's all it said. No context. Bethany's mind filled with very negative thoughts, like everyone in the office.
Fired.
Yeah, I'm going to get fired. Everyone in the office hates me. They've all been tolerating me this whole time. She drove home, got 2 bottles of wine, got absolutely drunk, drank again Saturday night. She didn't sleep Sunday night, and she went into work Sunday morning. She went into work Monday morning, and her boss said, "Bethany, I would like to offer you a promotion." It shows, in the absence of context and clarity, RSD will always assume the worst case scenario. And this is a true story that highlights how stressful it is being someone who lives with a nervous system who anticipates and expects rejection at every turn and every corner. So if there's any ambiguity where it's not absolutely clear, like your partner asking for a chat later when you get home, or someone replying to a text message with a thumbs up emoji, these things might sound bonkers to someone who doesn't understand the crippling nature of RSD. But when there's any ambiguity in messages like that, the RSD mind will catastrophize and implode with negative thoughts.
It's torturous. It sounds absolutely torturous. And there goes the exhaustion part of it as well. And maybe this is part of the coping skills. When I look at your life, this podcast, which is huge, ADHD Chatter, the books that you've written, the speeches that you're given, or that you give, and I'm sure the constant requests for your time, including for sitting down at a podcast with me, it's a lot. So is staying busy in that manner, is that part of the coping skill, or are you just better at it than others?
I think it is a major part of it. Yeah, I think ADHD, RSD shows up differently with many people. For me, I find it very hard to do nothing. My partner wishes more that I could sit down and enjoy a movie in the evenings, and I can do that from time to time, but typically I get very restless. I have to be doing something,
multitasking while you're watching the movie, that kind of thing.
In my mind, yeah. A film might be on. We're watching Lord of the Rings again at the moment, and I'm thinking of the podcast. I'm thinking of, a new script for a talk or a guest to interview. My mind is always going towards how can I progress my work, and I think that comes from a place of deep insecurity. I think that comes from a place of having to prove something to someone somewhere in the world who, somewhere along the lines, said that I wasn't going to amount or achieve anything. And I think people who achieve great things with ADHD at least with how society judges success, often are running away from an insecurity and a feeling of inadequacy. I think you often see people with RSD going the other way, going in this direction and not hiding away and almost working so hard to prove it wrong and actually achieving amazing things. The high achieving version of it is fairly common. And if you are someone like that, you have to be so aware that to manage the energy that's going into that, because if you are putting so much effort into achieving stuff that society is going to reward yourself, you're often doing it at the expense of being true to who you really are. And that's the message that I get from many people who are quote unquote high achieving with ADHD, is that actually they're just high masking. They're able
that's
to,
huge. I want people to hear that. That's a huge point. You're not high achieving in your head, you're high masking, and you linger there, or you're able to move beyond it.
well, there's an analogy which has been said before, with the beautiful swan that's on the lake, and it looks stunning and beautiful, and that's what the world sees, but they don't see the legs under the water frantically flapping in order for the swan to stay afloat. That is what high masking is. You can look like you've got your life together and you're getting the promotion, or you're handing that assignment in and the world is praising you for what you're doing, but the amount of effort that you're having to put into sustaining that level of output is significantly more than a typical person, because you're also simultaneously, in order to fit in and to achieve that, you're having to constantly play this character called normal, which is exhausting. You're always on the lookout for signs of danger, any looming threats, any criticisms around the corner, and to protect yourself from that and the deep emotional pain that comes with that is you put on this version of yourself that fits in and is accepted. You mirror people's personalities. You change your mannerisms. You even say that you like particular things when someone asks you, when you don't, just so you don't have their approval taken away. And that is sustainable, and it gets people far. But behind the scenes, behind the mask, it is totally exhausting. And you might get home from the end of your day and you've achieved amazing things, but the door shuts and you have a row with your partner because you've got nothing left. Or you might just fall to the floor and burst into tears because you've betrayed yourself so much. And that's, I think, one of the biggest risks of, if you are going that way with RSD, if you are the type that lives with it and you've decided that you're going to fight against that narrative and you're going to prove it wrong and you're going to achieve amazing things, that's often at the expense of being true to who you really are. And that in itself can be quite devastating.
Yeah, there's a cycle there that seems almost impossible to snap out of, but acceptance is where this starts. You make the point in the book again and again, you are enough. You've always been enough. And the messages that started as a child that control your life don't have to control your adulthood now and the rest of your life. That's why the book's so important, the podcast as well. I note that women seem to suffer from this at a higher level. I don't know that it's been quantified, but you do amazing work in talking about the effect this has on women. And it circles back to what you talked about with the danger of it, whether it's drinking or self-harming or whatever the case may be. You are enough. I mean, if there's one message, you are enough, I guess is it, right?
Yeah, it has to be. You are enough. And actually, many of the things that you were made to feel insecure about or made to feel anxious about when you were a kid will turn out to be your biggest strengths as an adult. And the earliest that someone can realize that and lean into those rather than hiding them and conforming, the better, because the outcomes otherwise are exhausting. I think women and men have many similar challenges when it comes to RSD. The people pleasing, the perfectionism, the avoiding decisions, they're a constant between the sexes. I think now that I've spoken to 300 women, not only on my podcast, but at events, and I've read the books, is that when you're a female and you have a challenge asserting boundaries and you say yes to things even when you don't want to do it, and the people pleasing within you can manifest in a much more vulnerable way than with many men. I think it can make you incredibly vulnerable to abuse as a woman. And I think that's the reality of living with RSD as a female. I spoke to a lady who shared the story of how she was stuck in a toxic relationship. She knew that she was being gaslit and she knew that she was being cheated on. And I don't want to go into too much detail, but she was being physically, hit in her relationship, and she knew she wanted to get out. She had to get out, but she couldn't have the conversation. She didn't know how to have the conversation. She didn't know how to leave. She didn't know how to speak about it with her relatives or her friends that is necessary in order to escape a situation like that. And she did eventually get out of it. She found her circle and she found her tribe and she did escape. But it nearly cost her her life, that inability to confront an uncomfortable conversation. And, and that's an extreme of it. But men will look at vulnerability and they will spot a female that struggles to put boundaries in place and might say yes to getting that taxi at the end of the night when really they mean no. Like, men will sniff that out. And I've spoken to so many women who now look back in hindsight with the understanding of RSD and the people pleaser that it made them, and can say with absolute certainty that that side of the ADHD experience made them extremely vulnerable to abuse. And if they could go back in time now with the knowledge of RSD, they would have listened to their gut and intuition and said no when they meant no, and not let RSD win and put themselves into positions that they really didn't want to be in.
As I said, they use the word a couple of times. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to hear, but it doesn't have to be your life prescription from here. So let's talk coping skills before we run out of time. It starts with acceptance. It's very painful to accept you have anything, whatever that anything is in life. It's hard to accept you're an addict. It's hard to accept you're sick. It's hard to accept you have cancer, heart disease, whatever. What do you say to people who are afraid to read the book?
Yeah, I think I would say the same to people that might be parents and they don't want their child to get a label of ADHD. And I say the same to them. It's like, if you don't acknowledge that there is something going on and you are that label, then society is going to label you anyway. Like, if a parent doesn't want to give their child the label of ADHD, which is a common issue I see with the generational gap of understanding, then that child is going to be labeled regardless. They'll be labeled much worse things than ADHD. They'll be labeled as too sensitive and lazy and too much and all the damaging things that cause RSD. And it's the same with RSD. If you don't want to give yourself another set of letters, or you believe that it's a real thing, like, the consequences of not acknowledging it will, I think, be more severe and more damaging to your well-being than maybe going on that journey of self-discovery and recognizing that this is something that you live with.
And the acceptance of the same is the first step. What's the second step?
So I think the first step is definitely acceptance and recognizing that this is RSD. I now know what it is and what causes it. It's caused by 20,000 extra micro rejections in my early years, and not one of those were my fault. And therefore now, when I feel that big emotional reaction, that internal or external sadness or rage, when I perceive someone has slighted me or rejected me, that big emotion that I'm feeling and all the shame that comes with that, that is also not my fault. And that in itself is step one. Step two is to learn some of the strategies, because even when you know it's not your fault, that pain is real. So it's important that we put stuff around us in order to mitigate that and to hopefully reduce it. And I think the main one is the main strategy for point 2 to reduce the pain is to ask yourself, is there any actual evidence that is backing up what RSD is making me feel right now? So to go back to that Bethany story where she relapsed because she thought she was going to get fired, RSD was convincing her she was going to get fired. Okay, is there any evidence that that fear that I'm going to get fired is true? And, she went back, she looked through emails, she spoke to her colleagues, and there was none. There was no evidence that backed up what RSD was making her feel. In fact, there was a lot of evidence that contradicted it. And if she had read that in the moment, it would have made it clear that RSD was once again being irrational and what she was feeling was RSD and not based in reality. I think it's so important as well, also, to remind yourself of your qualities and what you're good at and what your accomplishments and achievements are. And to always have a list of all of those things on you, really, like, I think at all times, if you have RSD. And then that can be a piece of paper or it can be the notes app on your phone, whatever it is, like a list of things that you're proud of, things that you're happy that you've achieved, amazing qualities about you as a person. Because when RSD strikes and you're feeling that deep emotional pain, you will in that moment feel like you are less than nothing. RSD will try to convince you that you are nothing and worthless and lazy and a useless human being. And it's so important in that state of mind to have the tangible evidence on you to read, to bring you down from it.
I think it's brilliant. I think it's absolutely brilliant. It's like having a best friend who you actually listen to.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so important to really set the time aside to write that list. We've all got things that we're happy about and proud of and things we've done that we're super pleased with ourselves for, and to really write those down. Because, when you see red, when you're in that deep emotional spiral, you're ruminating, you're convinced that everyone hates you, the front part of your brain that stores all of that shuts down. The prefrontal cortex that stores all of this logic and evidence and coping strategies, it switches off. So you can't try and remember it or think about it in the moment. When Beth got that email, there was no chance that she was going to be able to recall all of this stuff because the amygdala, the emotional part of the brain, took over, prefrontal cortex shuts down. She was screwed. And we've had that conversation. So yeah, don't rely on your brain in these moments. Rely on a piece of paper, rely on your phone app. And the third thing, really, so you've got acceptance, you've got some coping strategies. And the third thing is, and I always rely on what Ned Hallowell told me when he came on my podcast, is to never worry alone, to never think that you're the only person experiencing life this way. Find your tribe, find your people, find your community. Realize that there are many, many people who live with RSD and have these deep emotional blow-ups in life. And shame goes down when you realize that you're not the only person experiencing it.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Ned Hallowell. He actually diagnosed me with significant ADD in my 40s, and it changed my life. So I was even further down the road than you. He's a brilliant guy. As a matter of fact, he understands the ADD model so much and the ADD brain so much. He talked about stop looking for the answer the rest of the world has. Stop looking for an app that's going to make you organized. Stop looking for this stuff. Do one thing. Do the thing that you're thinking of now. Your pile will get smaller and so on. And I don't remember which book it was, but there was one book where he actually read something called The Skinny, where it was an acceptance that, hey, I understand you're not going to read the whole book. So here are the cliff notes. Go to the skinny. So if you take the Ned Hallowell example for why does everybody hate me, I know you're not offended if somebody jumps to a particular chapter. Where should they jump first? What section of the book? I know you haven't memorized the chapters, but what section of the book should they go to?
I think the first chapter is the best. There's a great intro by William Dodson, who discovered RSD, and he wrote the introduction for it. I did a brilliant interview with him. But really, the first chapter, it goes straight into the 20,000 comments and what those comments sound like. What I said earlier, you're too sensitive, you're not enough, you're too dramatic. 20,000 of those, what that actually does to the developing mind, what it creates in terms of rejection sensitivity, and how that means that when you're an adult, a relatively benign comment like your friend saying they're too busy to see you triggers a complete nervous system collapse, and it feels like you're being attacked. So what causes it, what it feels like, and also the things we put around ourselves in order to protect us from that pain, which is the people pleasing, the perfectionism, and the avoidance. All of that is covered in the first chapter, and really that's all you need. The coping strategies are super important, but that understanding piece, I think, is the most important thing, and that's all covered in the first chapter.
Well, it's brilliant, because if you can tell somebody, look, just read the first chapter. You can decide after that if you want to continue. Just read the first chapter. And one last piece of this, as far as coping goes, if you're a husband, a wife, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a best friend, a brother, a sister, and obviously parents, if you love somebody that you think has RSD, how do you help them? How are you better at helping them than in the past? And by the way, you don't help them by wallowing in the guilt you have that you did the wrong thing before, is the point you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, it's such an important question. And really, there's 3 points to helping somebody in your life, whether it's a child or a partner or even a parent who might have ADHD. And the first one is approaching it with curiosity and not judgment. If you think that someone has RSD in your circle, go on that journey together. Enjoy it, research it, talk about it. The second thing is to really set time aside to communicate and to discuss RSD. Like, don't talk about it in the moment when the blow-ups happen. Schedule maybe one evening a week, Friday night, Saturday night, whenever is available. Sit down for an hour and discuss the week that's just passed. Because there probably are some occasions in the previous 7 days where maybe RSD has shown up and there's been a situation, and you can look at it retrospectively in that communication session with a clear mind, and you're able to look back and say, hey, what happened? This happened because you said that thing, and you're able to communicate it from a place of rationality, and that's really important. And I think the third one, and this is super important if you're a parent and a partner, really, if there is an RSD moment and your child has a big reaction to something, if you tell them to do something or you suggest something hasn't quite gone right and they burst into tears or they can get very reactive, it's really not a good idea to match that energy and to try and stay at your level. Because if you respond in a way that matches their level, if you shout back or you get emotional with them, subconsciously that is telling them that that behavior is wrong. Whereas if you don't match it and you stay calm as the person who perhaps doesn't have RSD, that is sending the signal that it's okay to have these big responses and it's okay to have these big emotions. Because there's nothing worse than someone with RSD who has a big emotional response to something, and then on top of that, they're made to feel great shame about that response. So I think whether the person with RSD is your child or a partner, if there is a big emotional response, try your hardest. And I know it's hard, like it's not always easy to just stay level, but try not to match it wherever possible. Try and stay below them.
Those are all amazing points, and the time you give it here is crucially important as well. And I know people watching and listening appreciate it. I hope we can do it again. I'm not your dad, but I can look at you now and hear everything you've said and wonder aloud, should I be worried about you? Because you are swimming in a pool that was really painful to you. And every day you talk to people who, while it may be affirming to know that the rest of the world is going through it, it can't be easy for you.
No, it's not. And it's a question I've never been asked before. So thank you for asking it. It is tough. I have my DMs, my emails are open. I receive, I'm not even exaggerating, hundreds of messages every single day from
I'm
people who have
sure.
read the book and are telling me their stories of their experience. And some of them are really, really heavy, really deep. And I'm trying my best to reply to as many as possible. But it is a lot. But also it brings me a lot of motivation to carry on because I can see that there is this demand for awareness and demand for help that has been unmet for so many years, generations. I truly believe that. I think RSD is very newly understood. ADHD, really, in the grand scope of things, is very newly understood. I think the whole community is desperate for understanding, and part of being part of the process of bringing answers to that community has exposed me to the stories of the people within it. But it just reminds me, the heartbreak does remind me how important my work is, which enables me to keep finding the motivation to keep working towards bringing people the answers.
Well, I thank you for doing it. And by the way, you have my contact information. And if you ever want to call up and just scream, if you ever want to just reach out and say you would not believe the shit I went through today, it's an open invitation. And like I said, this book, extremely important. Why does everybody hate me? Your previous book, help me with the title that I don't have in front of me.
The previous book is called Now It All Makes Sense.
Yes, right. Which is the revelation of having it. The first step to a cure, or well, a cure is strong. The first step to a full life is accepting that you are different, but believing you are enough. And if you got anything out of this, I hope you get that. If you don't mind, let's do a parade of plugs here. Remind people where they can get your podcast.
The podcast is on YouTube. The podcast is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. I think it's on most podcast platforms.
ADHD Chatter, right?
Yes, that would help, the name. Yes. Yeah. ADHD Chatter, thanks.
And great guests all the time and great discussions all the time as well. I hope we've given people motivation to move forward, and I hope we can talk again.
Likewise. Today, thanks so much, Steve. It's been great fun talking to you.
Thank you for listening to Live from My Office, a service of Monkey Run Productions. All rights reserved. The podcast is hosted by Steve Cochran, and it's mixed, edited, and produced by me, Ross Cochran. Steve is available for corporate speaking gigs. He would love to MC your event, and occasionally, he's funny. Thank you for listening. Head to cochranshow.com for more.